The alien market. The alien market was alive with noise and color. Bright stalls lined the streets, filled with glowing fruits, strange metals, and creatures in cages. The air carried the smell of smoke, spices, and oil. Merchants shouted in rough voices, trying to draw buyers closer. Buyers argued loudly, fighting for better prices. Everywhere, hands traded goods, credits, or favors. It was chaos, but it was also normal. In the middle of this chaos stood a young alien girl. Her clothes were torn, her skin pale, her eyes wide with fear. She was small, thinner than the others around her. Her hands clutched at nothing, as if she had once held something important, but had lost it. People walked past her without slowing. Some glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Others laughed under their breath, shaking their heads. She was not part of their world anymore. The girl looked after a group walking away. They were her tribe, tall and proud, their backs straight, their eyes forward. They did not turn back for her, not once. They walked away as if she had never existed. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Her people had abandoned her. She was left behind in the market, unwanted, and no one cared. The market swallowed her loneliness. Voices grew louder, pushing her into silence. The sun beat down, hot and heavy. She swayed on her feet, weak from hunger. Her people had not fed her in days, saving food only for the strong. She was not strong, so she was left to die. In her culture, weakness was shame, and shame had no place among them. So now she stood alone, too weak to beg, too afraid to move. It was then that a voice cut through the noise, a voice that did not belong to the market. Is she alone? The voice asked. The words were simple, but they made the crowd still for a moment. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. The voice was human. At the edge of the market stood a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing clothes dusty from travel. A pack rested on his back, a weapon at his side. His face was calm, but his eyes sharp. He was not like the other buyers or sellers. He was a stranger, and strangers were always noticed. But more than that, he had done something no one else had dared. He had spoken for her. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met his. For the first time all day, she felt seen, not as a burden, not as shame, but as a person. The crowd reacted quickly. Laughter rose, harsh and mocking. She is nothing, one alien spat. Why does a human care for one thrown away? Another sneered. She is weak, not worth even a scrap of food. A third shouted. The laughter grew, cruel and sharp. The human did not laugh. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the dusty ground. His eyes never left the girl. He asked again, louder this time. Is she alone? The crowd hushed, waiting, but no one answered. The truth was already clear. The girl's hands shook. Her lips parted. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Her voice had been silent for too long. The human saw the fear in her. He saw the hunger in her eyes, the bones under her skin, and he understood she had been left to die. The human's jaw tightened. In his world, weakness was not shame. Weakness was simply a part of life. Children were protected, not abandoned. His anger burned, though his face stayed calm. He could not understand a people who would walk away from their own child. And yet here she was, proof of it. The crowd whispered. Some watched with mocking smiles. Others frowned, wondering why a human would waste his time. But all of them waited, curious. What would he do now? The human took another step forward. The girl flinched at first, then froze. His shadow fell over her, shielding her from the hot sun. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small piece of bread. He held it out, his hand steady. The girl's eyes widened at the sight. Her body trembled with hunger, but she did not move. She was afraid it was a trick. The human crouched down, bringing himself to her level. His voice softened. Take it, he said. No one had spoken to her like that in days. maybe longer. Her fingers stretched slowly, hesitant. Then she took the bread, clutching it tightly as if it might vanish. She bit into it, and tears filled her eyes. For the first time since being left behind, she felt alive again. The market went silent. The act was small, but it carried weight. A human had seen what no one else cared to see. A human had fed the one who was meant to die. The laughter faded, replaced by uneasy murmurs. The air felt heavier. Everyone knew something had just shifted. The girl chewed slowly, her body weak but her spirit flickering back to life. She looked at the human with wide eyes, filled with something new, hope. The human stood, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. He had spoken up, and now the whole market was watching. But he did not care. He had already made his choice. The human voice. The market still buzzed with sound. Yet around the human and the girl, there was a circle of silence. The bread in her small hands was more valuable than gold to her, more precious than air. She ate slowly, afraid the crowd might snatch it away, afraid it was not real. The human stood tall, his presence calm but sharp. It was not his bread that silenced the market, but his voice. When he had first spoken, the crowd thought it was nothing, a passing word. But when he asked again, louder this time, something in his tone made every creature pause. "Is she alone?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the shouting merchants. The words were simple, but the force behind them made the market shiver. It was not the voice of a customer, not the voice of a beggar. It was the voice of a man who had decided that silence was no longer allowed. The girl froze, her mouth still full. She looked up at him with fear and confusion. No one had asked about her before. No one had cared. Yet this stranger, this human, would not stop. She had no answer, but her eyes begged for someone to speak. The crowd, however, did answer, but not with honesty. Mocking laughter rose, sharp and cruel. "She is nothing," one alien sneered, its voice dripping with scorn. "She was left because she is weak," another shouted. "Weakness must be cast away. She does not belong, not here, not anywhere," a third added, and the crowd roared with agreement. The human's face did not change. He did not shout, he did not curse. He simply stared at the crowd with steady eyes. And when the noise grew too loud, he raised one hand. The simple gesture silenced more voices than anger ever could. He looked down at the girl again, his voice lower this time. "Do you have a name?" he asked. Her lips trembled, she swallowed hard, and for the first time she whispered, "Syrah." The sound was so soft, it nearly vanished in the market's noise. But he heard it, and his reply came like iron. "Then she is not nothing," he said firmly. "Her name is Syrah." The market stirred, whispers, running through the crowd like fire through dry grass. No one gave names to the abandoned. They were nameless shadows, forgotten before they starved. But the human had spoken her name aloud, given her back her place in the world. And that act alone was dangerous. The alien guards began to notice. Tall figures with hard armor and sharp weapons, their faces hidden by metal masks. They moved through the crowd with slow, heavy steps. Their orders were to keep the peace of the market, but their true purpose was control. They had seen what was happening, and they did not like it. One guard stopped before the human, his voice mechanical and cold. "This child is not yours," it said. "She was cast away, and the market does not tolerate the weak." The human's eyes locked on the guard's mask, unflinching. "She is not weak," he said, his voice steady. "She is hungry. She is small. But she is not weak." The crowd gasped, some in shock, some in awe, some in fear. No one had ever challenged the guards before. The guard's hand tightened around its weapon. "You will leave her," it said, "or you will leave this place broken." The human did not step back. Instead, he placed one hand gently on Syrah's shoulder. "She has already been left once," he said, his voice like stone. "I will not leave her again." The words carried across the market, heavy and powerful, Some in the crowd laughed again, nervous and sharp. Others whispered to each other, unsure what to believe. But in Sierra's chest, something new began to grow. A spark she had never felt before. Hope. She clung to the bread, but more than that, she clung to the sound of his voice. The way he spoke her name, the way he stood for her. She had been invisible, silent, unwanted. But now a human had spoken, and the whole market was forced to listen. The guards stepped closer, their weapons gleaming under the sun. The crowd held its breath, waiting for violence, waiting for blood. The human did not move, his shadow still covering Sierra, his hand steady on her shoulder, his other resting near his weapon. He was ready to defend her, even against an entire market. For the first time in her life, Sierra realized she was not alone. Her tribe had left her. Her people had abandoned her. But this stranger with a human voice had chosen differently. And in that choice, the world around her began to change. The harsh truth. The guards closed in, their metal masks hiding all emotion. But their heavy steps carried only threat. Sierra trembled, clutching the last piece of bread in her hands. Her small frame pressed against the human's side. The human did not move, his eyes fixed on the guards, his voice calm but unyielding. "This child has a name," he said. "Her name is Sierra, and I will not let you erase it." The crowd buzzed like a restless swarm, some shouting for the guards to take the girl, others whispering in awe at the human's defiance. For many, it was entertainment, but for a few, something deeper stirred. A dangerous thought. If one human could stand against the rules, then perhaps the rules were not unbreakable. The lead guard raised its weapon, a long spear of black alloy that hummed with hidden power. "This is not your matter," it declared, its voice sharp. She was abandoned by her own kind, her fate sealed, her name meaningless. Sierra winced at the words, the echo of her people's cruelty stinging her heart again. But the human shook his head slowly, his voice heavy with a truth that even the guards could not silence. "No life is meaningless," he said. "It is the ones who abandon that are truly weak." The words spread through the crowd like a crack in stone. Merchants paused, hands frozen over goods. Traders leaned closer, and even the cruelest mockers grew quiet. The guards did not like the silence, because silence meant the words had landed. One alien, tall and scaled, hissed angrily, "Humans think themselves noble, but you are nothing here. You have no voice in this market." The human turned his gaze on the speaker, steady and sharp. "Then why are you all listening?" he asked, and his words struck like a blade. The alien's mouth snapped shut, for even it could not deny the truth. Sierra's small fingers gripped the human's coat, her eyes wide as she looked up at him. No one had ever spoken for her before. No one had ever called her worthy. She wanted to believe, yet fear still gnawed at her. "What if they kill you?" she whispered softly, her voice barely rising above the noise. The human glanced down, his expression calm but gentle. "Then I will fall standing, not walking away," he answered, and her breath caught in her throat. The guards advanced, their weapons raised, the air around them humming with power. The crowd shifted back, clearing a circle of dust and tension. It was not the first time the guards had silenced a voice, and most expected to see blood. But the human's voice rang out again, cutting through the fear like fire through ice. "Tell me," he demanded, his eyes on the lead guard. "Why do you call her worthless? What crime has she committed? What sin is it to be small or hungry?" The guard hesitated, its voice mechanical and hollow. "She has no place because her people left her. She was judged and cast aside." "Judged by who?" The human pressed, his tone sharper. "By her elders, by her kind, by those who decide," the guard replied. "And what gave them the right?" the human asked, his words striking harder with each step. The guard's silence was louder than any answer. Sierra's heart pounded, her eyes darting between the human and the guards. No one had ever questioned the elders. No one had ever dared. Yet here was a stranger, not even of her blood, tearing holes in the laws with nothing but words. It was terrifying, and yet it was beautiful. The truth weighed heavy in the air. The girl was not left because she was weak. She was left because her people feared weakness. They threw away what they could not protect, so they would not feel shame. The harsh truth was not about Sirah, but about those who abandoned her. The crowd began to murmur again, but this time the tone was different. Not all were mocking. Not all were cruel. Some voices carried doubt, others carried shame, and a few carried something dangerous. Agreement. The guards sensed it, their grip on the crowd slipping. The lead guard raised its spear higher, voice booming with command. Enough! This market will not be poisoned by human lies. But the human stepped forward, his shadow falling long across the dust. They are not lies, he said firmly. They are truths you refuse to face. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The guards froze. The crowd held its breath, and even the air itself seemed to wait. Sirah stared at the human, her eyes wide, her chest tight. She realized then that this man was not only fighting for her, he was fighting for something greater. He was fighting for the right of every abandoned soul to be seen. The harsh truth had been spoken, and once truth escapes into the air, it cannot be chained again. The defiance, the silence of the alien market cracked like thin ice. No one moved. No one spoke. As the humans stood tall against the guards, dust swirled around their feet, carried by a dry wind that seemed to whisper of violence. Sirah clung to his side, her breath sharp, her heart caught between hope and terror. The lead guard's voice broke the stillness, deep and metallic. "You will pay for your defiance," it said, its weapon raised high. The crowd gasped, and some turned away, expecting the human's end to come swiftly. But the human did not step back. Instead, he planted his feet firm in the dirt. His voice rang out like iron striking stone. "I will not kneel," he said. "Not to cruelty, not to fear, not to you." The words stung like a lash, and even the guards hesitated. Never before had one spoken so openly in the market. Never had anyone dared. The alien merchants glanced at each other, their faces torn between fear and curiosity. A seed had been planted, a dangerous seed called courage. And once courage begins to grow, it cannot be unseen. The second guard moved forward, spear humming with energy. "Your words mean nothing," it hissed. "This child is property no longer wanted. She will be erased." Sirah shivered, her hands shaking as she pressed against the human's coat. Her wide eyes searched his face, looking for fear, but finding only steady fire. "No," he said sharply. "She is not property. She is not nothing. She is life, and I will not let you erase her." The market broke into chaos, voices shouting, some in anger, some in awe. "Silence him," cried a merchant. "He speaks blasphemy against the laws." "No, listen," shouted another. "He speaks truth, truth we have forgotten." The guards were caught in the storm of voices, but their duty was clear. Their weapons glowed brighter, their stance heavy with intent. They would strike, they would silence him. But the human raised his hand, not to fight, but to command. "You think strength comes from casting out the weak," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "But real strength is protecting what others abandon. Real strength is giving a name when others take it away." The crowd froze again, his words cutting deeper than any blade. Even those who mocked felt the sting, because inside their hearts they knew. They too had abandoned. They too had turned away from the small and the helpless. The lead guard growled, its voice breaking like static. "You will be punished, human. You defy law and order." The human stepped closer, his eyes sharp as glass. "Then punish me," he said. "But you will not take her," Sirah gasped, pulling at his sleeve, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her fear pouring into every word. The human knelt to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Because no one should stand alone," he said softly. "Because once someone stood for me." Her tears welled, falling silently onto the dust, and she gripped his hand as though it were the only anchor left in her world. The guards lunged forward, but something strange happened. The crowd shifted, not away, but inward, forming a wall of bodies between the human and the enforcers. Whispers turned to voices, voices to shouts, and shouts to a roar. "He is right!" cried one. "She has the right to live," shouted another, and then a chant rose, raw and defiant. "No more abandon, no more abandon." The guards faltered, their power rooted in fear. But fear was slipping through their grasp. They looked at the crowd, at the alien faces once silent, now burning with defiance, and they saw their authority crumble. The human straightened, his eyes meeting the lead guard's cold mask. "This is the beginning," he said, his voice steady. "Not just for her, but for all who were cast aside." "Your law ends here," the guard hissed in fury, but even it could feel the weight of the moment. To strike now would be to strike against more than one man. It would be to strike against a rising fire, and fires, once lit, do not die easily. Sierra held her breath, her small hand clutching his tighter. She felt the shift, the strange power of hope filling the air. For the first time since she was abandoned, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel worthless. She felt seen. And that feeling was stronger than any weapon the guards carried. The human looked down at her and gave the faintest nod. "This is defiance," he whispered, "and it is only the start." The rising flame, the market did not return to silence. It trembled like a storm breaking loose. Voices rising, footsteps moving, eyes burning with a fire no god could command. The human stood firm, Sierra's small hand wrapped in his, and for the first time, the crowd was no longer an audience. They were a tide. The guards tried to shout, their voices harsh and metallic. "Return to order, obey the law, disperse at once." But the words fell empty, drowned by the murmur that spread through every corner of the market. "No more abandon, no more abandon." The chant grew, first from a few lips, then from dozens, then from hundreds. It rolled across the square like thunder, shaking the very walls of the merchant stalls. Sierra's eyes widened. She could hardly believe what she saw. These were the same people who had looked away when she begged for food, the same people who mocked her when she cried. Now they stood tall, their voices joining hers, their strength no longer hidden. The human looked down at her and smiled faintly, though his eyes were sharp. "Do you see, little one? Fire spreads when it is given air." The lead guard slammed its spear into the ground, the sound cracking like lightning. "This defiance will be punished," it roared. "You risk death for following this human." But fear was no longer the master here. Hope had stolen its crown. The merchants, the traders, even the smallest children, standing at their parents' feet, lifted their voices higher. "No more abandon, no more abandon." The human raised his hand, his voice carrying above the storm. "Today you choose," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "You choose whether you will live chained by fear, or whether you will stand for those who cannot stand for themselves." The words struck deep, heavier than any weapon. The people felt them not in their ears, but in their bones. An old alien, bent with age, stepped forward slowly. Her voice cracked, but strong. "I cast aside my daughter long ago. I believed the law. I believed the lies. But today I see she was not weak. I was weak." Her confession shook the crowd, and tears rolled down her wrinkled face. Others followed, voices trembling. Stories of abandonment, regret, and pain spilled into the square. It was as though the human's defiance had opened a floodgate, long locked by shame. The guards shifted uneasily, their weapons still glowing, but their hands shaking. They were trained to fight bodies, but not to fight truth, not to fight unity. The second guard leaned close to the leader, its voice low and broken. They will not obey. The flame is too strong. If we strike, we will only feed it, the leader snarled. But it knew, deep inside its metal chest, that the fire had already spread too far. Syrah's heart raced. She held tighter to the human's hand. For the first time, she felt a strange strength within herself, as though the fire of the crowd burned inside her too. She stepped forward, her voice small but clear. "My name is Syrah," she said, her body trembling, but her words sharp. "And I am not nothing." The crowd erupted, their cheer crashing like a wave. The guards staggered back, the power of the people pressing against them, like a tide they could not hold. The human placed his hand gently on Syrah's shoulder, his voice proud. "They will remember your name now," he whispered. The chant shifted, no longer only no more abandon, but also, "Syrah, Syrah, Syrah." Her name echoed in the air, carried by hundreds of voices, lifted higher than the banners of the market, and with every echo, the flame grew. It was no longer just about one child. It was about all of them, all the forgotten, all the abandoned. The guards finally lowered their weapons, their voices bitter and broken. "This is not the end," the leader growled. "The elders will hear of this, and when they come, you will all pay." The threat hung heavy, but the people did not bend. They stood taller, their fire stronger than their fear, and the human's eyes gleamed as he answered, "Then let them come, for they will not face one. They will face all." The market burned with defiance, not with flames, but with voices, with hope, with a unity that could not be silenced. What began as one man standing for one child had become something greater, a rising flame, a promise that the world could be changed. Syrah leaned against the human, her heart steady for the first time. She whispered softly, "It started because you spoke." He shook his head, his gaze on the crowd. "No, little one. It started because you lived." And in that moment she believed. The wrath of the elders, the market's defiance did not remain hidden for long. Word spread like wildfire, carried by whispers through the alleys, by merchants traveling across planets, by frightened guards reporting up the chain of power. The elders heard, and when the elders hear, silence follows. They came not as shadows, but as thunder. Massive ships tore through the sky, their hulls black as obsidian, their engines shaking the ground below. From the clouds descended figures robed in silver, their faces hidden behind masks of glass and bone. They were the keepers of the law, the architects of abandonment, and their presence turned the air heavy. Syrah clung to the human's hand as the ships landed at the edge of the market. Her small voice trembled. "They are here for me." The human looked down at her, his eyes steady, though the weight of the moment pressed on his shoulders. "No," he said, "they are here because of all of us, because truth was spoken, and truth frightens them more than anything." The crowd that once shouted now stood in tense silence. The flame still burned, but the wind of fear pressed hard against it. The elders stepped forward, their voices carried by strange devices, deep and echoing as if the very earth spoke. "You dare defy the law of your world," they demanded, their gaze fixed not on the crowd, but on the lone human standing in the dust. "You shelter what was cast away. You spread poison among the faithful. You are a danger to all." The human did not kneel. He did not bow. He raised his chin and spoke. "Your law is not strength. It is fear. You call the weak a burden because you fear your own failure. You abandon children to protect your pride." His words shook the crowd. The courage that had wavered began to rise again. The elders hissed, their silver robes snapping in the wind. "You are not of this world. You have no right to speak." But the human's voice rose louder. "Then why does your people listen?" he asked, his words cutting like fire through dry wood. "They listen because the truth has weight, and no mask, no robe, no ship can make it lighter." The elders raised their staffs. power glowing at the tips. The ground cracked as energy hummed, the air itself bending to their command. Sira stumbled back in fear, but the human placed himself before her, shielding her with his body. "If you strike," he said, his voice strong, "then strike me, but you will never erase her again." The crowd gasped, hearts frozen between terror and awe. For the first time, they saw not just a man, but a wall, a shield standing against the might of the highest power. The flame of defiance flickered wildly in their chests. One merchant shouted, "He is right." Another cried, "We will not lose another child." Voices rose again, shaky but rising. "No more abandon, no more abandon." The elders' glow faltered for a moment, the rhythm of their power breaking under the storm of voices. They had ruled for centuries with silence, but now silence was shattered. They raised their staffs higher, their voices booming. "If you follow him, you will burn with him." But the human stepped forward, closer, his shadow stretching across the dust. "Then burn me," he said, his words sharp as steel. "But know this, fire spreads, and the more you try to kill it, the more it grows." The crowd erupted, not in fear, but in fury, their voices united. "No more abandon, no more abandon." The chant crashed like a wave against the elders. Sira's small voice joined them, trembling but firm. "My name is Sira," she cried. "I am not nothing." Her words struck harder than any weapon, for they came from the lips of the one the elders tried to erase. The market shook with power, not from weapons, but from truth. The elders froze, their glowing staffs dimming, their eyes hidden behind glass masks, but their silence clear. They could not crush the flame without revealing their fear. And fear, once seen, is weakness. The human looked at Sira and gave the faintest nod. "You are the proof they cannot destroy," he said softly, and in that moment, everyone believed it. The wrath of the elders had come, but instead of crushing the flame, it only fed it. The world had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The dawn of change. The market was never the same again. Where once it was filled with silence and fear, now it echoed with voices that no elder could command. The chant still lived in the air, even days later, carried through alleys and across cities. "No more abandon, no more abandon." Sira walked at the human's side, no longer hiding behind him, no longer clutching his coat in fear. She walked tall for the first time in her life, her eyes lifted, her name carried proudly by those around her. Merchants called to her with smiles instead of sneers. Children pointed and whispered, "That is Sira, the girl who spoke against the elders." Her heart still trembled, but it trembled with hope, not shame. The elders had left in silence, their ships cutting through the sky without victory. Their wrath had failed, their power shaken, and though they promised to return, they had already lost something they could never regain. The people had seen their weakness. They had seen that the law was not unbreakable, and once seen, that truth could never be forgotten. The human knew danger still lingered. The elders would not forgive. They would strike again, harder, fiercer. But the spark had already left the market. It was carried on ships, in trade, in whispers that became stories, from one world to the next. Tales of the human who stood for a forgotten child began to spread, and with every retelling, the flame grew brighter. Sira listened to those stories in disbelief. "They make me sound braver than I am," she whispered one night as they sat by the dim fire outside the city. The human shook his head, his gaze fixed on the stars. "No, little one, they see the truth. You stood, even when your voice shook. That is bravery." Her eyes shimmered, her heart heavy with emotion she could not name, but she leaned closer, her small shoulder resting against him. For the first time, she felt not abandoned, but chosen. The movement spread. Other children once left behind were found and lifted, their names spoken again. Other elders were questioned, their laws torn apart by voices once too afraid to rise. The chant thundered, not only in the market, but in villages, in cities, in the great halls where elders sat cloaked in false strength. "No more abandon" became the cry of a generation, and it all traced back to one moment, one man, and one small girl who dared to say, "I am not nothing." The human never claimed glory. He never asked for thanks. When people asked who he was, he only said, "Someone who could not walk away." And in those words lay the heart of humanity, the strange and dangerous gift that set them apart. Not their weapons, not their ships, but their refusal to abandon. Sira changed too. She grew bolder each day, her small voice rising into speeches that shook even the oldest merchants. She stood in front of other abandoned children and said, "You are not worthless. You are not nothing. You are more than the shame of those who left you." Her words spread like fire, for only the abandoned could truly speak to the abandoned. And when she spoke, they listened. The elders tried to silence it. Of course, they sent new enforcers, stronger weapons, louder threats, but the people no longer feared them. For every threat only made the chant louder. Every punishment only made the flame burn hotter. And soon, even the elders began to falter under the weight of the voices they could not quiet. One night, as the fire crackled low, Sira looked up at the human and asked softly, "Do you think it will last? Do you think this fire will stay?" The human looked at her, his eyes tired but steady. "Fires do not die when they live in hearts," he said. "And now it lives in many hearts, not just ours." She nodded, and for the first time, she allowed herself to dream of a future, not shaped by fear, but by choice. The dawn came slowly over the horizon. The sky painted gold and red. The market in the distance glowed under the morning light, no longer a place of abandonment, but of beginnings. The human stood with Sira at the edge of the camp, his gaze fixed forward, hers lifted with his. What began as one act of defiance had become a dawn of change. And though danger still loomed, though the elders still watched, the world was no longer theirs to control, because one child had been saved, and in saving her, humanity had saved them all.